It's Friday. That means it's Friday with Friends, where I bring in an interesting friend of mine to talk about news and all sorts of stuff. Joining us today is my friend, independent journalist Ali Bradley, live from Del Rio, Texas. Is that right?
Oh yeah, the second home these days, Brandy. I'm like an honorary Texan at this point, I think.
Yeah, you've been down there quite a bit, and I just love the Texas vibe you have. The big hair, the humidity looks good on you. Yeah, you look happy in the heat.
Thanks. You don't hear that very often. The humidity looks good on you, girl. Like I will wear that badge of honor. I don't know how my hair has handled this humidity, but it does. It does. I go out in Washington in 1 second, my hair is stick straight. But here, girl, we're living the dream. We're living our Dolly Parton life over here.
No, yeah. When I was with Fox 13 still, I went down to the border one time, and that was during the quote unquote kids in cages fiasco. And I was outside on live shot for like 30 seconds, and I looked like pure trash. So you're doing it well.
Thank
But
you.
I wanted to, in all seriousness, I know Fridays with Friends is supposed to be kind of fun, chat about you, chat about what you're doing, but you've been doing some really sad stuff, unfortunately. Last time we had you on the show, you were at the scene of the school shooting in Uvalde, Texas, covering that. We're going to talk in a moment about some of the really tragic events that have been happening with migrants along the southern border. I guess I'm curious, and I'm sure people who are listening are curious, how you internalize that, or how you deal, or do you internalize it, or how you deal with sort of the sadness and the stress of all that.
Yeah, I mean, I think as journalists, a lot of us, this will probably resonate with a lot of journalists. We just have this level of desensitization, and same with first responders. They deal with a lot of the similar things that we do. I remember when I was working in Seattle, and I sat down with our news director, and I had to ask her how do I separate myself from this? Because every day I was doing stories about death and somebody losing a loved one, and it was just devastating. And I do feel that I am low key a little bit of an empath. So I feel what people feel. And I always say I can meet them exactly where they are. And that does take a toll. But I think what I've kind of managed to do, and this probably isn't PC or appropriate for a journalist to do, I do make it a little bit personal sometimes. I make connections with these people and I follow up with them, and they become somebody who I know and somebody who I can follow up with. And it isn't just like exploiting them for the sake of getting the tears on the TV and then walking away. I get to know them. And so to me, that feels my soul a little bit too. It kind of gives me something back versus me just taking from them. You know what I mean? So I figured out a way to kind of make it personal. I know that's against the rules. We're not supposed to do that, but I think I've been able to separate myself enough in my stories. But in my personal life, I do have connections with most of the people that I tell stories about.
I actually think that's a good quality in a journalist. I mean, I have encountered journalists in Seattle who've been around for a long time who are like emotionless, who I hear them talk to families of crime victims, and I'm like, that person just lost a loved one. You know, how could you be so cold and callous? And so I think it's just human to feel something. I mean, you still have to be able to do your job and tell the story, but to let it like touch you in that way, I mean, I think is important to really understanding the gravity of it.
I think it's interesting that you brought that up about people being callous, because when I interviewed the grandfather in Uvalde, a lot of people were frustrated with the way I conducted the interview. And what a lot of people don't understand, Brandy, is the dynamic there, where most Southern Texas men, and especially Latino men, they don't radiate emotion. They aren't going to sit there and spill their guts and to just start crying and be, this puddle that everybody kind of expected him to be. And so I met him where he was. Because I talked to him exactly how he talked to me, we were able to talk for over an hour. We did cry at the end and we did pray at the end together. But during the interview, people were frustrated and they didn't think that I was emotional enough and kind of empathetic enough to him. But it was exactly where he was. And the energy matched. And so if you were in that room, it would have been a different story, I think.
Yeah, it's the same way if you've got a family member of a victim who is beside themselves with grief, and if you approach them just stone cold with no empathy, one, it's not right, but two, you're not going to be able to elicit anything from them as a journalist. So you're right, you really do have to kind of read the room and approach people where they are, as you put it. Speaking about Uvalde, last time we spoke, it was really before we knew the full extent of how poor the police response was. And I think both of of us were in a place of giving police the benefit of the doubt, because I mean, that's just sort of how I operate. I don't put myself in dangerous situations. And so unless I know otherwise, I'm past the point of the benefit of the doubt. I'm really disgusted by what's come out. You're very linked in with the law enforcement community there. You have good sources. How is the law enforcement community feeling about, I think, the national disgust over the police response in that incident?
It's interesting because it's still a mix. I talked to some of my Border Patrol sources and they still, are kind of saying that that is the information that they knew and that they had to go off of at that time. Obviously, we know that the commander on the ground, Chief Arredondo, he didn't make very great decisions. And we see the whole timeline, and your brains are scrambled eggs when you look at that and you're trying to figure out how that was a decision that was made. And you're trying to figure out, why did the sheriff step in? They were there. Sheriff Nolasco was there with deputies. Texas DPS was there. So it's kind of hard not to look at it in any other way that they needed a fall guy. Most of the damage was done in minutes, Brandi. So by the time a lot of these other agencies got there, I think they just kept their hands off and kind of let him take the brunt of it. And that's what we're seeing right now is really, Arredondo is kind of the one that's going to fall on the sword here. I mean, if he ever kind of surfaces and really shares more than what he did with the Texas Tribune.
So you have some law enforcement sources who are still kind of defensive of the way that things happen. Do you have law enforcement sources who are not, who are like I said, disgusted by it? Or
yeah. So one of my other sources has a child that was in the school. Thank God it was a third grader. So he was not in the building, but he was outside on the playground and witnessed the shooter outside and was ushered back into these classrooms that were not his, with classmates that were not his. I mean, devastating, right? And so this family, when I was with them, they didn't change their clothing for 5 days, Brandi. They were not even surviving. They were just existing. And that dad, the dad there, that agent, he is disgusted with the way that this all went down. He still can't process how this happened, how they weren't there to get into those rooms quicker, why they waited for these things. They learned that they used a hooligan, which is basically a crowbar to get in. And he's just, I mean, he was like, how? So yeah, there are certainly law enforcement individuals that can't even wrap their head around the response at all, not even in the slightest.
yeah, you spent a lot of time in that community. I know it's pretty close knit. How do you even begin to rebuild trust between the police department and law enforcement there and the people that they serve?
I don't even know. Honestly, I mean, I would probably start with new leadership in that regard. I mean, I wouldn't say that, get rid of Pete Arredondo. That's not my job to say that, but it would probably start with kind of changing up the guard a little bit, because you can't just keep things the same and expect change or expect people to rally around. You have to make some kind of change. And even if you're going to keep the same people in place, but you're going to put out different policies, or you're going to really loop in the community about what you're doing moving forward, I think that's the only way. I mean, they are demolishing that school, right? So that's one step in rebuilding in the community. But what are they doing on the police response side? What is the sheriff doing to make sure that the community feels safe? That when they hear the sirens, it's not, one of their children that's in danger. I mean, when you're in that town, Brandi, and an aid car drives by, you can hear a pin drop. Outside of the sirens, everybody stops everything that they're doing. It's still so devastating and traumatic in that community right now.
Yeah. And you kind of went from one terrible incident to another. There was this story. I mean, this is a tough one too. This is from Yahoo. Authorities arrest man accused of operating abandoned truck where 53 migrants died. First of all, do we know how these migrants died? Was it just the heat? They were abandoned in the truck, or?
Combination of things. So this truck was refrigerated. It was supposed to be, but there was no sign of a working AC unit in there. So a lot of people died from asphyxiation. A lot of them died from heat stroke and heat exhaustion. And the law enforcement individuals said when they were working on these people and they were transporting them, they were hot to the touch. And it was triple digits. And it has been down here in Texas. I mean, that is unfathomable conditions, Brandi. I mean, I can't even think, I can't even wrap my head around what they must have went through and what their final moments were. I mean, that is absolutely terrifying, absolutely devastating. And then to know that this truck went through a checkpoint but they didn't check it because they don't check every commercial vehicle because they can't. They don't have the manpower to do it. And it would, back up traffic for miles because the semi trucks go through basically the same place that the cars go through. And so what are they going to do? Governor Abbott just said that he's going to start more checkpoints immediately. So they're going to have more truck checkpoints going on, but this was preventable. This truck went through a federal checkpoint.
Yeah, and you got men, women, children, just devastating. And it shows you that these people who, are smuggling human beings, apparently the guy who was arrested was high out of his mind on meth when they found him. No care or concern they just want the money or whatever they're going to give him to get him across. And then no care or concern for whether they live or die once they're here.
And that's what law enforcement and Border Patrol are constantly saying and constantly urging the migrants to hear is that do not put your lives in the hands of these transnational criminal organizations because they don't care. Once they get the money, they don't care. That guy had the money already. He did his job. It didn't matter if they got to point Z. He picked him up at point A, and that was his job. So, and that's what we're seeing. And you see these pursuits ensue. Brandi, right now, and I have not even put this anywhere. I just got this from a source. 500 migrants have died this fiscal year. 500. I do not know if that includes a 53, but 500. And that's what we're looking at. I mean, we had 7 within the last 24 hours I posted about it yesterday. This is it's already out of control. It's been out of control. That's why I've been down here for almost a year. But with this heat and with the elements that we're going into, it's going to get worse. Someone has to do something.
Yeah, and there was just, as you said, there was the 4 migrants who were killed in a crash in the vehicle that they were being smuggled in. You've been down at the Rio Grande for drownings that have happened. You got people who died just from the conditions, people who die in trucks, being smuggled in. And I think to me what it says and what it should say to every single person in power is there is no safe way to come into this country illegally. There just isn't. And so you have to understand, and I know you appreciate the desperation that these people must be going through, but I guess for officials in Texas who are left to deal with the really tragic aftermath of incidents like this, what is their sentiment like right now towards the federal government, who's not doing more to make it difficult for people to come here illegally?
Well, for lack of a better word, they're pissed off, Brandi, because this is their job. It's not only to secure the border, but it's to preserve lives. They're literally up against a wall right now. They don't have the manpower to be out there. I don't know how many bodies are probably strewn about in ranch lands that were abandoned, because if you're vulnerable, if you're elderly, if you're a woman, you're a child, if you twist your ankle, break a toe while you're out there with your group being smuggled through the ranch lands, they're gonna leave you. You're gonna die. And how many bodies are out there? So these Border Patrol agents are angry. I spent 4.5 hours out there with a tracking team. We could not find the woman whose pin drop we had. And we came to the categorical conclusion that it was a distraction. So not only are they out there on this humanitarian effort trying to help, but they're being messed with by the coyote and the cartels too. They're getting fake locations. Like, hey, go out here. This is where we left them yesterday. And then you go out there and you spend 4 hours looking for them. And when you have 2 deputies, what does that mean? That means that there's a lot of unmanned areas, a lot of areas that are opportunities for these cartel, for these coyotes, for these human smugglers. So they're frustrated because they're not able to do their job. They haven't been able to do their job, they tell me, for a year or more, obviously at this point. But now we've had all these deaths and they're frustrated because they're preventable deaths. I just went to a Dangers of Crossing the Border media event in El Paso, and they were talking about it. They were saying, do not come into the country between the ports of entry. Come across in the port of entry. Come legally. Don't put your lives in the hands of these smugglers. Come across legally. People will help you. People will be here to receive you. But they're not doing that. And they're ending up dying, and they're ending up being smuggled in the trunks of cars. I mean, we're going to have more deaths. We've seen people in crates, Brandi, that are nailed shut, that they've had to open up with crowbars with people inside. I mean, it's really, really hard to wrap your head around. Well, we have.
Well, I would say for Democrats, I mean, and I don't want to lump all the Democrats in, but they talk about, they are not willing to talk about this as a public safety crisis. Because when I think public safety crisis, I also think for the people who are coming across. It's not humane to have an open southern border. I mean, look at what it's leading to. And I guess I wish that that would sink in more.
Well, it's just, it can't be about humanity, Brandy. And I've said this before, because if it were about humanity, then there would be people up along the ports of entry protesting. There would be people up there ushering these folks in to walk across. They would be mandating, they would be requiring that that happens instead of being put in the hands of these smugglers to be forced to cross the river with children when the Amistad Dam is out and the river's higher than normal and they're getting swept away. I mean, if this were about humanity, there would be an actual way that these people are able to cross if they legitimately are seeking asylum. But they get a ticket at the port of entry and then they get kicked back into Mexico if they cross at, a legitimate crossing. And a lot of these migrants are now being killed off by rival gangs because it's more lucrative. Bodies are lucrative, not drugs. You can reuse people and you can keep getting money out of them, but drugs are once. So now we've got rival gangs over in Mexico that are killing each other's migrants. So they don't want to go back to Mexico. So if this were about humanity, the administration would be doing something about this. They would be requiring Border Patrol and other agencies to allow these people to walk across and to claim asylum on this side by walking instead of by going into the hands of these smugglers and owing them hundreds of thousands of dollars at this point.
Yeah, illegal immigration needs to be tougher. Legal immigration still needs to be vetted, but it needs to be not marred in red tape, which so much government stuff is. And I'm saying this as, I know this is not your opinion, but we have such a social safety net in states like Washington for people who are here and who are undocumented. COVID money during the coronavirus pandemic, and I just can't help but think, I don't mind taking care of human beings, but you're not making it, you're incentivizing people coming here illegally, which right, as we know is dangerous. And that just can't be where we're at as a country.
Well, and Brandy, I just talked to, and I posted it online as well. This is something new that we have not seen a lot of since I've been covering the southern border. People are openly talking about wanting to be here to work now, not asylum. They're openly saying, I'm not claiming asylum. I just want to be here to work. And that is different. Not saying that we shouldn't have workers coming in here, but it's different because they've never admitted it, because they know that that's not an asylum claim. So it's really interesting. It's kind of brazen, if you will, that I have 4 single adult men saying, no, I'm here to work. And that's what we're dealing with, and then we have law enforcement that are taking matters into their own hands. I told you about how Sheriff Coe in Kinney County, they had a smuggling pursuit happen, and there were 3 other pursuits going on at the same time. 4 migrants were in this person, 5 total. 1 was transported to the hospital. 4 refused medical care. Well, Border Patrol refused to take them because they have to be cleared by the ER department if they are involved in an accident, because what if they have internal injuries? Border Patrol said, we're not taking them. Well, Kinney County Sheriff only has a few deputies. So his deputy would have had to sit at the hospital for 7+ hours, the sheriff says, because these people wouldn't have been priority. They don't have the manpower to have them sit there. So he had his deputy load up the 4 people and take them to the port of entry and drop them off and kind of point in the direction of Mexico and allow them to go to Mexico. I mean, if they really wanted to, they could have turned right back around and walked back into the US, but I think they were probably a little shocked that happened. But now the ACLU is going after the sheriff. There's all these legalities here, but it's such a gray area, Brandy. This has never happened before. And he believes he's within his constitutional right to protect his citizens, because these people were not self-surrendering. They were evading law enforcement. They were being smuggled into the interior of our country. And so he believes that was his only option. So, I mean, it's like the Wild West out here right now.
Yeah, that's wild. The sheriff just bringing people right back to the border. I mean, that's not usually how things operate, but I can't say that I blame the guy for just saying, you know what, I'm fed up with this.
He didn't cross over the border. He brought him to the port of entry and basically said, do what you will, but you're not going to do it in the middle of my town.
Yeah. Well, Allie, let's end with this. I always just appreciate all your insight. It's just been fascinating to watch what you've done and just grabbing hold of the border issue and doing some really, really great work. Do you plan to continue to cover the border kind of for the foreseeable future?
Yeah. People have asked me, when is your job done at the border? When are you done? Because in August, it will be a full year where I've come down at least once a month. I've done something border related. The 1 month exception was when I went down and walked with the caravan. But I'll say that my job at the border will be done when the pendulum doesn't swing so aggressively. When in between administrations, we kind of have this little teetering. We know policies are going to change, but right now, everything that President Trump did has been undone. And all those policies weren't necessarily wrong. Some of them, like biometrics for children under 14, that makes sense to most people. Claiming asylum in the first place that you're safe and can make a life. A lot of people agree with those things. But because it was the administration that this current administration wildly disagrees with, the pendulum is aggressively swinging to the left, to the right, and back and forth. And this political football just keeps getting hiked in between the goalposts, right? And we're never, ever winning. Neither side is ever going to win until we can come to this agreement that what's best for America and what's best for these migrants as well, and what's humane, and the policies kind of just teeter. That's when, I think I'll be done covering it. I think even if I move to a completely different country, I would still have a pulse on the border because of the sources that I've cultivated and the trust that I've really cultivated with these people. I get messages every day. Like I said, I just learned that 500 migrants have died this fiscal year from a source that's within DHS. And I'm honored to have those sources and to be a voice for the ones that don't have a voice. They have a gag order on them. They literally cannot talk. And what's cool, Brandi, though, is while I have law enforcement sources, I have amazing migrant sources too. I get to talk to Victor still all the time, who's down in El Salvador. He was in my caravan carrying the flag. I get to talk to the family of Venezuelans who are in Oklahoma City. They're doing well. They are working, albeit under the table because they have to. I get to talk to a lot of them as well. But their protections are a little bit different because they're trying to live their life right now. And I'm trying to respect that as well. And not air out what they're trying to do. The government has a hold on what they're doing. And so I'm not trying to make their life harder because I know it can't be an easy one right now.
Yeah, well, I think you said something there that speaks to the heart of this show. This idea of when the pendulum just keeps swinging to the far extremes. And that goes for not only the border, but a variety of issues. America, you can't function like that every 4 years with such vastly different policy prescriptions. So, Allie Bradley from Texas, thank you again for joining us and for enlightening us and for being on Friday with Friends.
Thank you, Brandi. I am honored to be your friend and to call you a friend. Thank you for having me.
If you like this video, make sure to become an undivided subscriber to help us grow this mission to give common sense a comeback. You can do that in 2 ways, at patreon.com/undivided or by becoming a contributor on my Locals community, brandikruse.locals.com. Thank you to the founding sponsor of Undivided, 1530 Mortgage. Visit them at 1530mortgage.com.